Welcome to our post-launch news conference. And here's Launch Director Bob Seek to describe the day of himself and the launch team. Bob?
Well, obviously, glad to be here, and I can assure you there's an excited team at Kennedy Space Center tonight, and very happy because in the year that we have worked to prepare for this STS-49 mission, I think every technician, inspector, engineer, support person, operations person, sometime during that year spent some time getting ready for this launch. So everybody's part of it, and everybody feels that tonight now that we have a good machine on orbit. The launch count really went well. We started tanking just about on time. The only problems we worked did not really impact the being ready to pick up the clock at 9 minutes at the beginning of the window. We had to send a red crew out to activate a backup power supply for our solid rocket booster heaters, and they fixed that problem with a workaround with some real-time engineering. In our launch processing system, computer on the floor of the control room, we had one of the console computers fail about 2 hours before launch, and we activated a backup plan for that, which was to move those engineers to a spare console in our other control room, and they did that. And that was a first to have members of the launch team not in what we call the prime control center, but that worked just well, just fine. And the final item was the proverbial glitch in one of our avionics boxes on board, a master events controller. And about a half hour before the beginning of the window, this particular circuit, built-in test equipment circuit, indicated an anomaly, and the team analyzed that. The worst situation it could have been is one of really 4 modules that control the sequence of events from T0 through the ascent phase of the mission. One of those event modules could have had an intermittent glitch in it that would have manifested itself in this built-in test equipment areas. So we assessed that and assessed that as no risk to the mission. And after that, it was just a matter of waiting on the weather. And as you know, the local weather cleared up before the team converged on the selection of a TAL site. And once that was behind us, we went ahead and did what we like to do best and launched a great orbiter into orbit, which is where it is now, and it's performing just fine.
Thanks, Bob. Let's proceed to questions. Wait for the mic. Give your name and affiliation, please. Up front here, Dan.
Dan Billow, WESH-TV. Congratulations, Bob. Want to ask you, we had a brief look at you and Bob Crippen and Dan Golden, I guess, talking to the launch team in the LCC there. Could you pass along a little bit of what was said and what people said there?
Well, the program management, our new administrator and center director, obviously elated with the events of the day because and they reminded the team that although it's something that we accept all in a day's work, that the significance of an event, putting a new orbiter onto orbit, is more important than just a day's work. And because it says something about the program, the support to the program, because this national resource, which is a new one, represents a commitment from the taxpayer and all those who support us in the legislative process that this is a good investment of the taxpayers' dollars, and we help bring that to fruition. And that is an important message that everybody should understand. And we were reminded of that, and how happy that the management structure of the program was with the accomplishments of the day.
Jim.
Jim Banky, Florida Today. Bob, can you just give a few more details about that console crash? Which one did it, and were there any hardwire concerns? And then a second question, can you talk a little bit about the schedule now with Columbia and flights moving out right a little bit for the rest of this year? What kind of resources, problems you're having getting those flights off?
Well, the console houses the engineers responsible for the hypergolic systems on the orbiter, and the auxiliary power units, the hydraulic systems for both the orbiter and the solid rocket boosters. And for the most part, those systems are static, as it were. There's nothing dynamic that goes on there other than starting the orbiter auxiliary power units at 5 minutes, and that's done by the crew on board. And the ones on the solid rocket booster, and those are started by software, the ground launch sequencer, inside of 31 seconds. So the primary role and responsibility of the engineers there is to assess something that doesn't happen per the plan. They have no active control functions per se. So the main thing we wanted to ensure was that we would get those experts into a location where they would have proper visibility into those systems when they were activated, so that if we had an anomaly, we could call on them for a disposition. And that's why it was not an impact to move that console, those people, elsewhere. There's some other consoles in the control room that are mandatory down to 31 seconds because they have hardwire functions, or they have to have activity that requires an action from their console and terminal count. And those are more difficult to move, but as is usually the case, we have a backup plan for any console that crashes in the control room at any time during the count.
Harry?
And the other item, just a quick item on the schedule, we have not we haven't rebaselined new launch dates for the remainder of the year, but you know, in general terms, we're looking at STS-50 with Columbia sometime in mid-June. We're looking at STS-46 with Atlantis, the tethered satellite mission, in mid-July, and the next mission after that will be the reflight of Endeavour around the first week in September.
Now, Harry?
Harry Colcom, Aviation Week. Did you fly with any waivers at all, Bob? It seemed like the decision on the Master Events Controller
The Master Events Controller item, we made the assumption, worst case, that one of our 4 redundancies had glitched, and therefore it had suspect pedigree. And based on that, we did have to process a waiver, because our rules would say that in order to give up any redundancies pre-launch requires that mission management team interaction. The only other item was a temperature measurement in the auxiliary power unit system, which is indicative of heater cycling, and we had another measurement on the same line which told us we had proper heater operation. So we documented that as an LCC waiver just for documentation purposes, but the heater was working fine.
Phil?
Phil Chen, adding a little bit on that, Bob, with the Master Events Controller. I understand there's 4 modules and they vote together or something like that?
Well, you have 2 boxes. There's 2 Master Events Controllers, and there's redundancy in each one of those boxes. So for every item that they control during ascent, be it SRB SEP or tank separation or closing the ET doors on the vehicle, there's a number of items that they manage on a time sequence basis. And there's modules, solid state hardware in the Master Events Controller that control those events. There's 2 controllers and there's 2 modules for each event in each controller. We made the assumption that one of the modules in controller number 2 had intermittently failed and caused this byte circuit to activate. And even though it restored itself, we assumed that module, and we don't have fidelity in the data to tell which one it was, had temporarily failed, and it may fail again when it would be needed during the mission. But that being the case, and that's why we documented it with the waiver, we still have 3 other modules that would control that same function.
And a totally separate question, a little bit on GEMS. We had talked before that once you got your 4th orbit operational, you'd have to keep on juggling them and keep one vertical at all times. How much more difficult is that going to be now with your various cutbacks in personnel and resources?
Well, as we've always said, sure, the degree of difficulty goes up as you lose resources, but the only penalty we will pay for that is schedule delays. We're not going to compromise the quality of the hardware, the work effort, or any of the requirements that have to be implemented in preparing the vehicles for flight. And so far, looking at our resources out through the end of the year, we can meet in general terms, the flight rate that I described throughout the rest of the year with the resources we currently have on board.
Any additional questions? That concludes this news conference. Thank you for coming.